He drew the snake venom from her thigh. What occurred after shocked them both. The jungle groaned under the weight of a coming storm, the sky a bruised purple that mirrored the darkening veins on Aeryn's pale, silken thigh. Silas didn't hesitate, his calloused hands gripping her hips to hold her steady as he leaned in. The other members of the diplomatic envoy, tall and spindly beings who valued logic over biology, watched with a mixture of horror and fascination. They had already calculated the probability of her survival at less than 3%, yet this human was disregarding every protocol of sterile contact. Silas pressed his mouth to the puncture, the metallic tang of her blood mixing with the bitter, burning acridity of the venom. He spat the darkened fluid onto the moss, his jaw set in a grim line of determination. "You are going to be fine," he whispered, his voice a low vibration against her skin. Aeryn gasped, her fingers clutching at the rough fabric of his tactical vest. The pain was a white-hot iron, but the sensation of his heat, the sheer audacity of his touch, provided a strange, grounding anchor. She was a daughter of the high hegemony, a race that viewed touch as a functional necessity, yet the friction of Silas's stubble against her leg sparked a fire that the venom couldn't extinguish. She watched him, her eyes wide and pupils dilated, as he repeated the motion, his focus absolute. He wasn't just saving her life. He was claiming it through a display of biological stubbornness that her people had long ago evolved away from. "Stop, the toxicity will stop your own heart," she managed to choke out, her voice trembling. Silas looked up, a drop of her blood glistening on his lower lip. "My heart has its own plans," he said, his eyes locking onto hers with a ferocity that made her breath hitch. The delegates murmured among themselves, their translation implants struggling to categorize the human's behavior. To them, it looked like a ritual of consumption, but the way Aeryn's vitals began to stabilize on their scanners told a different story. The human's body was a furnace, his immune system engaging the trace amounts of toxin he swallowed with a violent efficiency. He stood up, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, and scooped her into his arms. He didn't ask for permission. He simply moved, his boots sinking into the soft earth as he carried her toward the temporary shelter they had erected near the landing zone. The interior of the shelter was cramped, filled with the hum of a portable heater and the rhythmic drumming of rain against the reinforced canvas. Silas laid Aeryn down on a thermal blanket, his movements surprisingly gentle for a man built like a mountain. He began to strip away her torn flight suit, his eyes never leaving hers, seeking permission in the golden depths of her irises. She nodded slowly, her body humming with a strange, post-traumatic electricity. As the fabric fell away, revealing the lithe, elegant curves of her alien physiology, Silas felt a surge of protectiveness that transcended his mission parameters. "I need to clean the rest of it," he said, reaching for a medical kit. Aeryn watched him, nodding the way his muscles rippled under his sweat-stained shirt. "Your species is so physical," she whispered, her hand reaching out to touch the scars on his forearm. "We have to be," he replied, opening a canister of antiseptic. "Everything we have, we fought for." He began to wash the wound, his fingers tracing the contours of her leg with a lingering touch that felt less like medicine and more like a caress. The tension in the room shifted, the air becoming heavy with something more potent than the storm outside. Aeryn felt a heat blooming in her chest, a reaction her tutors had told her was a relic of a primitive past. Yet, as Silas leaned over her, his scent of salt and warm skin filling her senses, she realized that logic was a cold comfort compared to the fire of a human's presence. "The others think you are insane," she said, her voice dropping to a low, husky register. Silas chuckled, a dark sound that vibrated in the small space. "They think anything they can't measure is a flaw," he said, his hand moving higher up her thigh, the contact sending jolts of pleasure through her nervous system. "I think the flaw is living, without feeling your blood burn." Aeryn arched her back, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. The venom was gone, replaced by a yearning that was far more dangerous. She reached up, her fingers tangling in the short, dark hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him down until their faces were inches apart. The power dynamic had shifted. He was the savior, but she was the one demanding the next move. "Show me," she commanded, her lips brushing against his. Show me how humans burn. Silas didn't need a second invitation. He captured her mouth with a hunger that spoke of months of repressed desire. It wasn't a soft kiss. It was a collision of cultures and biology. His tongue explored her mouth with a possessive rhythm, and Aeryn met him with an intensity that surprised them both. She was supposed to be the refined diplomat, the pinnacle of galactic grace, but under Silas's touch, she was unraveling. He moved between her legs, his weight a welcome pressure that grounded her, his hands mapping the territory of her body as if he were trying to memorize every inch of her. The storm outside intensified, lightning illuminating the shelter in brief, jagged flashes. Inside, the heat was stifling. Silas pulled back for a moment, his breath ragged, his eyes searching hers. This changes everything, he warned, his voice thick with a sudden realization. The treaty, your position, if they find out. Aeryn pulled him back down, her legs wrapping around his waist with a strength she didn't know she possessed. Let them find out, she said, her voice a fierce vow. Let them see that a human can do what their science cannot. She guided his hand to the center of her being, a bold move that shattered the last of his restraint. Silas groaned, a sound of pure, unadulterated need. He realized then that the venom he had sucked out was only a catalyst for a much larger transformation. The human capacity for empathy and physical connection was a weapon of its own, one that could dismantle empires more effectively than any railgun. As he buried himself within her, the sensation was a revelation, a merging of two distinct worlds into a single, thrumming pulse of life. The revelation hit Silas mid-stride as they moved together. It wasn't just about her survival. The venom of the Zai's serpent didn't just kill, it acted as a pheromonal bridge in certain species, amplifying latent desires. He had inadvertently bonded himself to her in a way that the hegemonie's genetics couldn't override. He felt her thoughts bleeding into his, a kaleidoscope of golden light and ancient melodies. She wasn't just an alien diplomat. She was becoming a part of him. This was the shock the locals spoke of, not the venom's sting, but the soul tie that followed a shared brush with death. Aeryn's eyes went wide, her pupils flaring until they nearly swallowed the gold. She saw Silas's memories, the dusty plains of Earth, the cold vacuum of space, the faces of comrades lost. She felt the depth of his loneliness and the sudden, overwhelming fullness of his love for her. It was a psychic explosion that left her gasping, her body shuddering against his as they reached a shared, shattering peak. They lay together in the aftermath, the rain finally subsiding into a gentle patter, their bodies slick and intertwined. You saw it, didn't you? Silas asked, his voice a ghost of a sound. Aeryn nodded, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady, powerful thrum of his heart. I saw everything, she said. Your people, you don't just survive, you endure, you carry everyone with you. She looked up at him, a new clarity in her gaze. The venom had been a death sentence, but Silas had turned it into a covenant. The other delegates would never understand. They would see a breach of protocol, a biological anomaly. But she saw the future. A future where the cold logic of the stars was tempered by the heat of human passion. We have to tell them, Silas said, though he didn't move to get up. Not about this, Aeryn replied, gesturing to their joined bodies. But about what you are. They think humans are just tools, builders, and soldiers. They don't know you are the heart of the galaxy. She traced the line of his jaw, her touch light as a feather. And I am going to make sure they learn. The next morning, the jungle was a vibrant, shimmering green. The envoy stood by the shuttle, their expressions unreadable as Silas and Aeryn emerged from the shelter. They moved with a synchronized grace, a subtle shift in their posture that suggested a deep, unspoken alignment. The lead delegate, a spindly creature named Venom, stepped forward, its ocular sensors whirring as it scanned Aeryn. Your recovery is statistically improbable, Venom stated, its voice a series of clicking tones. The human's method was primitive and unhygienic. Aeryn stepped forward, her head held high, the authority in her voice making the delegate recoil. It was effective, she said, her voice ringing through the clearing. While you were calculating my death, he was ensuring my life. That is the difference between your logic and his humanity. Silas stood behind her, a silent shadow of muscle and intent. He didn't need to speak. His presence was enough of a statement. He saw the way the other aliens looked at him now, not with condescension, but with a burgeoning, uncomfortable respect. They were afraid of the raw power he represented, the ability to act outside the lines of correct behavior. The journey back to the capital ship was a blur of high-speed transit and hushed whispers. Silas and Aeryn stayed close, their hands occasionally brushing, a secret language of touch that kept them grounded. They knew the challenges ahead. The hegemony wouldn't take kindly to a diplomat being tainted by a human, but Aeryn was already planning her defense. She would use the bond, the shock of the venom, to bridge the gap between their species. On the observation deck of the Imperial star, looking out at the swirling nebula of the sector, Silas felt a hand slip into his. He didn't look back. He knew the warmth of her skin anywhere. "What happens now?" he asked. Aeryn leaned her head against his shoulder, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Now we change the galaxy," she said. "One human heart at a time." Silas smiled, pulling her closer. He had come to Zeiss as a bodyguard, a man hired to watch the shadows. He was leaving as something much more, a catalyst for a new era. The venom had been meant to kill, but in the hands of a human who refused to let go, it had become the strongest bond in the universe. He looked down at the woman in his arms, the alien princess who had found her soul in a human embrace, and he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The political fallout was immediate. When the Council of Elders saw the footage of the rescue, or rather, the lack of it from their own kind, the scandal rippled through the high courts. Aeryn stood before them, not as a victim, but as a witness to a strength they couldn't replicate. She spoke of Silas's actions, of the way he had risked his own life without a second thought, and how that selflessness was the key to a true alliance. "You value efficiency," she told the council, her voice echoing in the vast, sterile chamber. "But there is no efficiency in a soul that doesn't care if it breaks. The humans are not our subordinates. They are our missing half." Silas stood in the gallery, watching her, his heart swelling with a pride he had never felt for any flag or commander. He saw the way the elders shifted in their seats, their cold eyes finally showing a glimmer of something that looked like curiosity. They were beginning to see that the human weakness for emotion was actually their greatest asset. In the weeks that followed, the Silas-Aeryn Accord became a reality. It wasn't just a trade agreement. It was a cultural exchange program that prioritized the study of human ethics and crisis response. Silas was appointed as the head of a new interspecies task force, one that trained alien medics to think like humans, to see the person, not just the probability. But for Silas and Aeryn, the real victory was in the quiet moments. In their private quarters, away from the eyes of the galaxy, they explored the depth of their connection. The bond from the venom had matured into something deep and abiding, a constant hum in the back of their minds that reminded them they were never alone. One evening, as they watched the suns of a new world set from their balcony, Silas turned to her. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "The snake, the pain, everything that followed." Aeryn laughed, a bright, clear sound that filled the air. She reached out, her fingers tracing the scar on his lip where he had first drawn the poison. "I only regret that it didn't happen sooner," she said. "I was a statue before I met you, Silas. You didn't just save my life, you gave me one." He pulled her into a deep, lingering kiss, the heat between them as intense as it had been in that rain-soaked shelter. They were a testament to the HFY philosophy, that humanity's true power wasn't in their technology or their weapons, but in their capacity to love so fiercely that even the laws of biology had to bow. The galaxy was a vast, often cold place, but in the warmth of their embrace, it felt a little smaller, a little kinder. They were the pioneers of a new way of being, a fusion of logic and passion that would light the way for generations to come. And it all started with a man, a woman, and a choice to defy the inevitable. As the years passed, the story of the human who drew the snake venom became a legend. It was told on distant outposts and in the grand halls of the hegemony. It became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the face of certain death, a human could find a way to win. Sulla's and Un's children, the first of a new hybrid generation, grew up with the best of both worlds, the analytical minds of the hegemony and the unbreakable spirits of Earth. They were the living proof that the shock wasn't a biological accident, but a destiny. Silas often looked at his daughter, Ulena, and saw the same fire in her eyes that had first drawn him to An. She was bold, compassionate, and utterly fearless, a true daughter of humanity. One day, while walking through the gardens of the new capital, Silas saw a group of young alien students surrounding a human instructor. They were learning about the sucking of the wound, a module now required in all medical training. He smiled to himself, remembering the raw terror and the sudden, sharp clarity of that moment in the jungle. He felt a familiar presence at his side. An slipped her arm through his, her hair silvered slightly with age, but her eyes as bright as the day they met. "They're still talking about it," she teased, leaning her head against his arm. "It's a good story," Silas replied, squeezing her hand. "But I think the ending is the best part." She looked up at him, a mischievous glint in her eyes. The ending, Silas were just getting started. They walked on together, two souls forged in the fire of a human's refusal to give up. The galaxy was changing, and they were the ones holding the torch. Behind them, the gardens bloomed with flowers from a dozen worlds, their scents mingling in the air, a complex, beautiful tapestry that was much like their lives. No cinnamon, no ozone, just the honest, grounding smell of life itself. In the grand tapestry of the universe, the story of Silas and An was a single thread, but it was a thread of vibrant, unbreakable gold. It was a story that proved that when a human is pushed to the limit, they don't just survive, they transcend. And in that transcendence, they bring everyone else along with them. The final revelation came much later, in the twilight of their lives. An discovered that the shock hadn't just bonded them. It had subtly altered her DNA to extend her lifespan, allowing her to stay with Silas for as long as he lived. It was the ultimate gift from a species that refused to say goodbye. "You humans," she whispered to him one night, as they lay together under the stars of Earth. "You even cheat death for the ones you love." Silas kissed her forehead, his grip as strong as it had ever been. "We don't call it cheating," he said. "We call it staying for one more dance." And as the music of the spheres played on, they danced, a human and his alien bride, forever a part of the starlight they had fought so hard to reach. The galaxy watched and learned, and for the first time in an eon, it felt truly alive. The legacy of their love was etched into the very stars themselves. Constellations were renamed in their honor, the healer and the diplomat, standing guard over the systems they had united. Human ingenuity had been proven in countless wars, but Silas had proven something far more vital. Human empathy was the most powerful technology in existence. An's people, once cold and detached, began to build monuments to feeling. They created art that was messy and emotional, and they began to touch one another with the same reverence Silas had shown her on that mossy jungle floor. The human infection, as the critics had once called it, had become the human enlightenment. Silas sat on his porch, looking out over the hills of Kentucky, where he had brought An to spend their final years. She was inside, singing a song she had learned on her home world, her voice blending with the chirping of the crickets. He felt a deep sense of peace. He had done his job. He had protected the diplomat, and in doing so, he had protected the future. He thought back to the moment the snake had struck. He remembered the fear, yes, but mostly he remembered the absolute certainty that he would not let her go. That was the human secret, the refusal to accept the unacceptable. It was a simple thing, really, but it had changed everything. An came out to join him, carrying 2 mugs of tea. She sat down in the rocking chair beside him, her presence a warm, familiar comfort. "The stars are beautiful tonight," she said, her voice soft. "They look like they're cheering." Silas laughed, taking a sip of his tea. "Maybe they are, maybe they are." They sat in silence for a long time, watching the celestial display. They knew their time was coming to an end, but they weren't afraid. They had lived a life that was larger than their individual selves, a life that would continue in the hearts of their children and the peace of the galaxy. "I love you, Silas," she said, her hand finding his. I love you, An, he replied. And in that simple exchange, the entire history of the universe seemed to find its purpose. Two beings, different in every way that mattered to a scanner, but identical in every way that mattered to a heart. They were the bridge, the spark, and the eternal flame. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, golden shadows over the land, Silas felt a sudden, sharp pang of joy. He had been a soldier, a survivalist, a man of grit and bone. But because of a beautiful alien girl and a bit of snake venom, he had become a legend. He had shown the galaxy that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their fists, but in their willingness to bleed for another. The shock had indeed shocked them both, but it was the aftermath that had changed the world. It was the choice to stay, the choice to love, and the choice to believe that even in a galaxy of 1 billion stars, one person could make all the difference. Silas closed his eyes, listening to the sound of An's breathing, and he knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The story of the human who saved the princess was old, but Silas and An had given it a new meaning. They had made it real. They had made it last. And as the darkness finally claimed the day, the light of their legacy burned brighter than ever, a beacon for any lost soul looking for a reason to keep going. In the end, it wasn't about the venom or the cure. It was about the moment of contact, the bridge built between two worlds with a single, desperate act of love. And that, Silas thought as he drifted into sleep, was the most humanity thing of all. The galaxy continued to turn. New civilizations rose and fell, but the story of Silas and An remained. It was taught to every schoolchild on Earth and every initiate in the hegemony. It became the foundation of a new philosophy, one that prized connection over conquest and passion over power. They were the first, but they were not the last. Because of them, thousands of other humans and aliens found their own shock, their own moments of connection that defied the odds. The universe became a smaller, warmer place, filled with the sounds of 1 million different hearts beating in a single human rhythm. And somewhere, out past the farthest nebula, in a place where the stars are born, two spirits danced on. They were the healer and the diplomat, the human and the alien, forever joined, forever burning, a reminder that love is the only toxin that never needs a cure.